Hello, hi. So I'm back for VEDA Day 30, but this is also my Lovecraft recap. So Lovecraft Country. So I figured I've been like doing the recap kind of the day after, and I felt like I was kind of missing some stuff, and so I just decided now I'll try to do them right after the show. So I just finished watching it, and it was a really good episode. So we got to have a good old-fashioned haunting. And so what I think seems like it's gonna happen, the different episodes seem to take on kind of certain horror or kind of sci-fi fantasy approaches to story. So this episode, it was a ghost story. And before I talk about this first episode, I want to throw some things out there. Because I went back and rewatched the first episode because I was wanting to see what are some themes, some horror conventions, some sci-fi fantasy conventions, and then just some character things that we should keep an eye out for this season. And so a couple of things that I want to mention to kind of mention it to keep in mind for me, but also for you watching. One, I definitely noticed, of course, I think we've all realized that Atticus is definitely giving us kind of the chosen one, which is really a common trope in kind of the sci-fi fantasy, really more so fantasy, where there's like a one person who can kind of make who the story centers around, but also who is able to make things happen and kind of make the change and all that good stuff. But in that same vein, I think that Atticus and Letty are like, I don't know the right word, but they're like the two sides of the same coin. So when Atticus is kind of the chosen one, he's kind of the golden boy, so to speak, in some instances, because he's the one that's kind of moving things along. But on the inverse side, you have Letty, who she also kind of has some chosen one vibe, but with her family, she's the black sheep. She's the one who isn't doing the responsible or respectable thing. She doesn't have a proper job. She kind of moves around. She gets into trouble. As we've heard, like, she is an activist. She's an activism, and so she, is kind of involved with that. But through that, though, it's kind of similar. And I think with Atticus, another note I made, that he is kind of like the prodigal son. So he went off to war against his father's wishes. His father was like, why are you fighting this war? This country doesn't care about you. You shouldn't care about this country. And then he comes back home to find his father and to reconnect with his father. Whereas Letty is kind of the perpetual prodigal son. So she always goes off to kind of chase some type of adventure or, some type of cause or something that she's going to do. But then she returns home and she's not always well received. Whereas when Atticus comes home, everyone is like, oh my God, it's happy and all that. So it's very much like they're two sides of the same coin, which makes them, it kind of gives me like a twin flame type of thing. And so I wanted to mention that because I think that that's going to continue to play out in various ways where, they're going to be drawn to each other. But if you look at their family dynamics are kind of similar, but they seem to be going down the same path. And so that's really just that's something that I'm noticing. And so I'm going to keep an eye out for that as kind of a theme to see how that goes. Another thing I want to mention about them too that's similar but slightly different, where Atticus definitely seems to be very intuitive. Like, he can sense when things are happening. He can tell what's going on, whereas Letty is very observant. So she sees what other people don't see, which is similar, the two. So they definitely give me kind of some twin flame type of situation, which makes sense. And I want to see if they actually kind of morph into truly love interest, or if it kind of remains this kindred spirit type of thing. So we'll see. But I wanted to mention that before I talked about the recap. And let me know your thoughts if you are getting kind of a similar vibe. If you hadn't seen it at all, keep an eye out for it. I'm curious to see how that's going to go throughout the season. But episode 3, Holy Ghost. So at first glance, it's a ghost story. When we see the house that Lady bought, is clearly looks like a house that could possibly be haunted. Just this big old sprawling home that's kind of slightly dilapidated, but still got good bones, as most haunted houses tend to have good bones, but then the insides are like, ah. So, you know, she gets the house. It's in the north side of Chicago, which, you know, is a white area. They're coming from the south side, which is the black area, and we already expect a level of kind of terror from the neighborhood. We expect that, so that when that happens, it's kind of a given. It's not really a surprise, unfortunately, just because we just know, you know, Jim Crow America. We know what it means, and I mean, hell, sometimes even in present day and time, if you are a black family and you move to a predominantly white area, building, neighborhood, whatever, the chances of there being some terror or terroristic behavior exists. So that part isn't so much the horror. The horror is in the ghost story, and it was a very classic kind of haunted house story. Now, one of the things that I've noticed, and I was kind of noting during the episode, was I noticed how they mentioned the story about I guess it was a riot or something where Montrose and George were in a situation where they were about to be attacked by a group of men, I'm presuming a group of white men, and they were doing something, and then this guy shows up with the bat, like Jackie Robinson, and, you know, takes out all the folks that are about to do them harm. And I just made a note because that is very similar to what we saw in the very first episode at the very beginning, when Atticus was on the field of war and the ship came down, and then the creature, the female creature, the femme creature, you know, kind of grabbed him, said something, and then he turned around and there was like this big creature, and then a dude that looked like that was Jackie Robinson came and hit him with a bat. So I don't know what that means, but it probably means something. And the fact that it's been mentioned more than once in the series already, just something, put a pin in that. But I want to get back to the ghost story. So it was interesting, of course. I was like, okay, cool, a haunting. This is what's making me think that each episode is going to kind of have its own horror sci-fi convention. And also with seeing what's supposed to happen next week, it kind of gives me like an Indiana Jones adventure type of situation, type of scenario that they go on. So I think that's cool. I think that's dope. I look forward to seeing kind of how those themes play out each episode. But that's awesome. And as a fan of Indiana Jones who's seen all of them, except for the last one, because I was just like, well, why? I was a big fan of it, and so I think that's cool. One thing I want to mention, I am wondering. So last episode, the second episode, Letty died. She was shot. She died. She came back to life. So I think that changed her. And she referenced it in this week's episode where she was like, I feel like a ghost. So I think that is a clue. And what I think, and what I wrote down in my notes was, Letty can call the dead, ? And sure enough, at the very end of the episode, she essentially did just that. She did kind of what you would think of, she invoked the ancestors. She called the ancestors to help her to cleanse the house of this, you know, malevolent spirit of the guy of the white man who was living there, who was doing these tests on black people. So it looks like he was going kidnapping black people and then like doing tests and experiments. That's a very, I don't want to say, it's a commonly known thing in a lot of areas where, you know, a lot of science and a lot of medical technology and procedures, not all, but, you know, a good bit of them, especially the field of modern gynecology, but also other ones, came about as a result of doctors testing these different procedures and things on Black people. That was not an uncommon thing. But one thing I want to point out that I find interesting is that this happened. This is 1950s. I think it was 1955 was the year that came at the very beginning. 1955 in Chicago, and this is a story that happened in recent times where a scientist was experimenting on Black people, kidnapping them, experimenting on them. And when you saw the Black people, they looked current, like they weren't dressed in like clothes from the 1800s. Because I think what people do is that when you talk about these illegal experimentations, they immediately go to, like, you know, the 1800s, where things were way, you know, less advanced, and the only way they knew how to figure things out was to test them on people and themselves, etc. And that's when they were doing these horrible things. No, this stuff is current. It's in recent history. Many of us are present. Our parents, I know for me, my parents, some of you, your grandparents, depending on how old you are, some of you, depending on how old you are, were alive and thriving in the 50s, and that was still when they were doing these things to Black people. So I think people should take that as a history lesson. But the thing that I noted, and I think that this is something that's going to come up later, I think that Letty, because she died and then was revived, she has a connection to the spirit realm, which was kind of indicated when she was able to invoke the spirits of the people who had been murdered in that house, and use them to get rid of that malevolent spirit of the man who owned the house. She was able to do that because she now has the power to invoke the ancestors. And I think that that is going to come back around. And I'm very curious to see if that's going to come back around, because I think that's kind of dope that she would have that power. And then, of course, we end where I knew Christina, she was not gone. And of course, she came back, and she's still puppeting things. She's still pulling the strings to make stuff happen, because she has a goal, and they have a goal from this. Let me see, I wrote down, I have notes. The organization is, because I was not remembering things. Darn it, I'm drawing a blank on the group. There it is, the Order of the Ancient Dawn, the Sons of Adam. So she is still, in spite of her father, you know, turning to dust, but also kind of treating her as less than because she's a woman. She is still moving forward with the goal of that organization. She is still determined to push that organization forward and work towards their goal of deciphering the words of Adam in these books. So she is back. She is, I didn't think, excuse me, it's not the Rona. I need some water. I didn't have any yet. She's back. She's not gone. I didn't think she was. I knew she would be back. I just wasn't sure how and what capacity, but it makes sense. So we definitely are going to see her, you know, Atticus is, you know, because like they have this familiar connection. So he's still of value to her. However, it doesn't seem that she wants to use him the same way that her father did. It seems, and so I'm hypothesizing now. I think that she realizes that Atticus could be more value to her as an ally of hers, like they can do this together, versus her just simply trying to use what he has in order to get what she wants. He can be an active participant and actively help her get what she needs versus taking it. So, you know, it's a difference in approach from her father, who was definitely more of like a sledgehammer, where she's being more precise with kind of her approach and how she is connecting with him and staying involved in their lives. And, you know, apparently they have unlimited resources, so she can just kind of move and come and go as she pleases, which she essentially is. So I'm very interested to see how that whole relationship and how that is going to pan out over the course of the season. But I definitely could tell that Letty and Atticus had, you know, they have some energy. And so I'm interested to see what's going to happen. I also George isn't dead. George is dead, but George is still with us. George is now an ancestor, and since Letty, so this is my, this is kind of what I think is going to happen. Since Letty can call the dead, because I think that Letty can call the dead, I think she has a connection to the spirit realm and the ancestors. We saw that happen. I think that that is how we're going to see George again. Also, something else I realized, that I think that having George was such a strong, kind of solid, comforting, but powerful, impactful character but that Hippolyta could not, she could not reach her peak of where she's going to play, her role she's going to play in this story. It wouldn't have been the same if George were here, because, based on kind of the time as his wife, there's only so much that is going to make sense for her to be able to do as the wife of such a strong man. So with him being in the ancestral realm, one, I think Letty is going to invoke him. I don't know if she's going to do it once or twice or multiple times, but I definitely think that Letty is going to call to the ancestors, and George is going to be an ancestor who's going to show up and provide support. But also, now that George has died, Hippolyta is going to come into her own as a character. And as I said in my first recap, I think that Hippolyta, for sure, her character is just at the beginning. There's something, we're gonna get more from her throughout the season, and we might even get some more from Diana, but I'm not 100%. Diana, I'm saying her name wrong. Dee. We might get even more from Dee, but I'm not 100% sure what that's going to look like for this season. But I definitely think we're gonna get more from Hippolyta, and so seeing this starting to happen, I'm excited to see where this is gonna go. But those are my kind of thoughts about tonight's episode. I didn't want to do a play-by-play because I'm going to link below to Lovecraft Radio, which is the podcast that's the companion podcast to the series. And one of the ladies is a writer for the show, and I can't remember the other lady on the show, but they do a great breakdown. And so I think me doing a play-by-play kind of recap, I don't know if that's the most helpful, because you should definitely listen to that. So click below, check out podcast, the Lovecraft Radio podcast. I'm going to be listening to it tomorrow to see what they say about the episode. They provide really great inside context, because one of the writers is a part of it, but also they give you historical context, horror context, like all of it. The fact that the one who's the writer, and I'm forgetting their names, I'll remember for the next one. The fact that she's a Buffy fan, I was like, well, because Buffy, my jam. Love me some Buffy, and so I think that's cool. But so definitely check that out for kind of a fuller, more kind of recap approach. What I want to talk about are some themes and hypotheses about what I think is going to happen next. So that is what I have shared. So let me know your thoughts. What do you think is going to happen? Are you watching Lovecraft Country? Are you having a hard time understanding it? Because another thing that I realized, which is kind of looking at some other people posting about the show, is that we have people, right now we're kind of at a dearth of new programming just because of everything that happened with, with the pandemic and kind of things shutting down earlier this year, and things are still not fully back and functioning as they shouldn't be because it's in a pandemic. But a lot of shows that would have normally been filming over these past few months, or might have been filming early this year, stopped. And so a lot of new stuff isn't out, which means a lot of people are kind of hungering for some interesting content. So people, I think, are watching this show because it's Black, it's awesome, it's dope. You got Journey Smollett, who I'm a fan of. You got all these dope people in it. You got Courtney B. Vance. You got, Wanjanae Ellis. Like, you got all these dope people in it. And so people are watching this because it's a really dope idea. It's a cool show. Everybody's excited. But people are watching it and they have no idea what's really happening because they don't live in this space. This isn't something that they're interested in. So if you find yourself having questions, let me know. Drop them below, and then I can answer them and maybe help kind of provide some context and explain. Otherwise, I would love to know your thoughts. I want to know if you agree with me about Letty being able to call the dead, about Hippolyta, about to step into her own, about George coming back Violetta, which I think will be fantastic and really cool. Of course, kind of watching Atticus go on this hero's journey, and you know, there's definitely something behind the you know, we're getting these lovely shots of the actor, and that's awesome. It's good to have a little eye candy on a series like this we don't typically get, but I think there's something behind the character that we haven't heard yet, and so there's definitely more about him to learn. All of that. Christina, something else going on there. I'm curious if her and Atticus are going to maybe find a way to kind of come to a common ground, because they are related, but you know, that's a very fraught relation, but they are related. So I'm just curious as to what that's going to look like. But what do you think? What are your thoughts about tonight's episode? What are your thoughts about the season so far? What do you think is going to happen next? Are you excited about next week? I am, because we get some Indiana Jones adventure type stuff, and I'm always a fan of that. Let me know what you think. So this is VEDA Day 30, but also this is my Lovecraft episode 3 Holy Ghost recap. Yeah, let's talk about it in the comments. What do you think? Comment below. Thank you for tuning in, for joining me. This was fun. I'm very excited about this season, and I look forward to the next time that we can talk again. Bye.